Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to spend some time with me and watch the video. Always appreciate that. And guys, today we're going to be talking about what is the most difficult thing for any bass angler to accept in the sport. I'm going to have a pretty lengthy discussion on this. I think you guys might find it interesting, and of course I'd be glad to get your guys' comments on it as well. Also, guys, just a quick thank you out there. I just want to give everybody a big thank you for helping my new jig, the Block It Throwback jig from Cumberland Lures, to be a big success at Tackle Warehouse. We introduced it last Friday and they sold out in one afternoon, everything we had. So if you guys have been trying to order them, you can still place your order on back order, and you probably get them in a couple weeks there. So I want to give everybody a big thank you for that, and appreciate the support very much. Me and my family do. Okay, guys, I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to tell you what the most difficult thing for any angler to accept is out there, and then we're going to go into it in detail and sort of maybe give you guys some tips and advice on it. The most difficult thing for anyone that has to accept in fishing, or the reality of what everybody has to accept, is that traditional bass fishing, real bass fishing, it's the most difficult sport in the world, simply because there's more controlled and uncontrolled variables than any other sport. And I want to get into that today, talking about real bass fishing. I'm not talking about spotlighting for bass using forward-facing sonar, which takes no skill at all. It's just basically looking at a live imaging on a screen and casting to something you're seeing and watch the fish react in real time. I'm talking about real traditional bass fishing. And even though I say, and I don't think anyone can argue with that after I get done talking about this, even though it is the most difficult sport in the world, that is not anything that's a negative, because that's one of the most wonderful things about bass fishing is you never learn it all. Real bass fishing. I need to clarify the difference between bass fishing, all bass fishing, and real bass fishing, or fake bass fishing, forward-facing sonar. But that should not be, anything that's a negative thing to you, because it's going to allow you to maintain that never-ending search and the mystery and the magic of the sport. And then when you do have those little successes, it makes it even more rewarding. So let's talk a little bit about why it's the most difficult sport in the world. Number one is, like I said, you have the controlled and uncontrolled variables. And the uncontrolled variables are the ones that are probably by far fewer than the controlled variables. But the uncontrolled variables are things like the weather conditions, other anglers on the water, fishing pressure, different type of things that you have absolutely no control of, as far as, how the water rises, if a flood comes in, or if there's a drought, or if it's raining, or if it's cloudy, or if it's sunny out, or if the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour, or if the wind's not blowing at all. You have a set of uncontrolled variables that factor in to every aspect of bass fishing, in the decisions that you make, and the lures and techniques and the type of areas that you want to fish. So that's something that we have to deal with. And that is one of the most frustrating things, because it's really frustrating as a tournament angler. Maybe not so much as if you're just a recreational angler that do not fish competitively, but in a tournament situation, those uncontrolled variables can be devastating. A prime example of an uncontrolled variable, let's say that you've got a really good spot that you just think the fish are loaded there, and instead of getting boat number 10, you're boat number 125, and some guy beats you to that spot. That's an uncontrolled variable, and there's lots of them out there. So they have a very hard to deal with effect on tournament anglers. I've been through it myself many times, where I've had certain weather patterns come through that have either helped or really hurt my pattern. Again, recreational fishing pressure, just stuff that I had no control of, blowing a motor, having an ear come off on a propeller, all that type of stuff. So you can't really sweat that too much. That's just sort of like, it is what it is. But the things that also make it the most difficult sport in the world is the fact that there are so many controlled variables. We have so many controlled variables in this sport that is just, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of them. Because let's just take, let's take a lure, for example. Okay, if you got a lure like a crankbait, let's say crankbait or jerkbait. Okay, you've got all the different profiles. You've got the different lengths. You got the different diameters. Some of them have a higher back. Some of them have a shorter back. Some of them have a narrow back. Some of them have a wide back. You've got 5 or 6 or 7 different lip configurations. It can be a medium runner, a deep runner, a shallow runner. It can have, different type of paint finishes. It can have a flat finish, a metallic finish, a translucent finish. And all these factors have got to come together in that one lure the day that you're on the water to trigger that fish to bite. And you may not have the color right. You may not have the right lip angle right. You may not have the right speed of retrieve. You may be reeling it a little too fast, a little too slow. Maybe they want a stop and go retrieve instead of a steady retrieve. So just on a crankbait, there's an endless line of variables. Hooks again. Maybe sometimes if you don't have the right hook on there, you're going to lose the fish. And on the crankbait, you got to have the right line test. It's like maybe that crankbait needs 12-pound line to hit that magic depth zone, but if you've got 10 or 15-pound test line on, maybe that's getting too deep or too shallow. So just in one lure genre there is literally hundreds of different control variables that can affect the outcome of a day just on a crankbait. And then you have everything else to consider. You have things like split rings. You have things like snaps. You have, all your different rod and reels as far as the actions on them. You've got, different type of speed or retrieve reels. You've got dozens and dozens of different lure categories that you have to decide which lure category is going to be best on the given condition that you're on the water. And the conditions can be anything. It can be anything from hot and sunny to cloudy and freezing cold and everything in between. And every single day, every single condition that you have, there may be a change in water clarity one day. It may be blowing 5 miles an hour one day and 10 miles an hour the next day. Every one of those changes the bass's mood and personality. And then it gets back into what we talked about, the lure categories again. It's like the conditions that the bass have on there are going to have an effect on the type of lure they want, the presentation, the speed of retrieve, how deep you're fishing. It's literally, guys, I could sit here and list off 1,000 different things that is a controlled variable in fishing, things that you have control about. But one of the challenges in fishing is like, even though you have control of everything, you don't have time on a day in the water. You don't have time in a year on the water to try everything. For example, let's go back to the crankbait again. It's like you get out there and say you try your favorite blackback chartreuse crankbait, and it may or may not be working. But then again, if it's not working, you have a possibility of maybe 3 or 4 dozen different color configurations, and maybe it's a color. Maybe you got to keep switching until you hit that color. And then after you've run through all the colors and nothing seems to make a difference, maybe it's a profile. Maybe they want an 1.5-inch crankbait instead of a 2-inch crankbait. So then you got to consider the profile of the lure. And then you got to consider wobble. Maybe they want a wide wobble. Maybe they want a narrow wobble. Maybe they want an in-between wobble. And once in a while, we hit upon all that stuff. Now, you don't have to hit upon everything, guys, to catch fish. Don't get me wrong. Because one of the things in fishing you'll find out is if you're around the fish and you're in a good area, you can still catch fish, and you may not have the best bait. That's why it's important to become a student of the fish and understanding bass seasonal patterns and movements for traditional real bass fishing. Now, like I said, if you're a spotlighter, you got a bag of forward-facing sonar minnows and you got your 6 graphs on there, none of this is going to apply to you. But the other aspect that we talked about, just the crankbait example I used, it goes to every other lure category. You can say the same thing about a jig. It's like, okay, do you want do they want a brown jig? Do they want a black jig? Do they want a black jig with blue on it? Do they want a black jig with chartreuse? Do they want a little bit of orange with a brown jig? Do they want a 3/8 ounce jig or a 5/8 ounce jig? Do they want that jig fished on 17-pound test or 25-pound test because the jig falls different? Do they want a flipping or pitching presentation? Do you have to get 10 foot away from them to get the bite, or do you need to stay 30 foot away from them to get the bite? You see what I'm talking about? Every single lure category has an endless amount of variables that affect its outcome. So, therefore, be kind to yourself on those days that you're not catching them. Be kind to yourself, because you're participating in the most difficult sport on planet Earth, because you're dealing with a bass that it's a live creature. It's an inanimate object. So, it doesn't play by the rules. It doesn't read books. It doesn't watch YouTube videos. It has a mind of its own. But regardless of all that type of stuff, do not be intimidated, because that is the magic of fishing. We don't ever want to know everything about it. Guys, one of the most saddest things that I see in bass fishing is people that say, they want to learn so much about a bass that there's no mystery left. You don't ever want to get to that point, guys. You don't ever want to get to a point where you know everything, or we know where every bass is. One of the most probably the most good word to say this, but the saddest day that fishing will ever experience, the sport of bass fishing, is that if we reach the level of a technological advancement where we know where every bass in the lake is. That's where we're headed right now. We're headed towards that. Once we know where every bass in the lake is, and we've taken away the magic and the mystery of the sport, we have destroyed the sport. We've destroyed everything about it. We've destroyed the value of it. And most people can wrap their mind around that. Most people that have a sense and a respect and an honor for the fish and the sport as a true sport, they can wrap their minds around that. It's not difficult to do. And so just embrace it, man. Embrace the fact that if you're a real bass angler, you're a traditional bass angler, that you're in the toughest sport. There's going to be more days than not than you don't catch them. There's going to be more days than not that frustrates you. There's going to be more days than not than you're not successful. But that's okay, because it's not about catching fish. One of the things every great philosopher will ever say about fishing, every single philosopher that I've ever read on fishing that has been around for hundreds of years, it's not about catching, it's about the experience of fishing. Catching is a bonus. Don't get me wrong, catching is great. Everybody loves to catch fish. I love to catch fish. But the times that you don't catch fish, it makes those times that you do catch fish even more special. Because I've been fishing before on several different occasions where it was every cast. Literally, I sat there and caught just cast after cast after cast. And eventually, after you start catching so many, you lose that appreciation, and you lose that wonderment. And I find myself, just being mad at myself for being so nonchalant about the act of catching fish. The best days that I have in bass fishing are those days where, I may not catch a lot of fish, but I figured something out. It's like I figured the puzzle out by changing and experimenting and doing this or that. And that's what's really, and also the other experiences that you see on the lake and just being out in nature. So anyway, guys, just a few thoughts for that. Let me know what you all think about it. We'll talk later. See you.